You guys ran for over 100 yards again this week. Can you talk about how as a coach, how gratifying is that for you to be able to run the ball the way you guys been able to run the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think I think New Orleans was a definite right step in the, definitely a good step in the right direction. I think a lot of yesterday's yards was attributed to Bryce being able to create a little bit off schedule on pass plays that weren't necessarily runs, and I think that's a credit to him. But there were definitely some things that we can definitely take some positives away from, but not quite to the extent of what the New Orleans game was.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gary?
Hey, Sean, can you update us on any injuries coming out of that game?
Sure. So Lance McCutcheon had an AC sprain, so we'll be kind of day to day with him. Aaron Donald got an ankle sprain. We'll also have more information on that. And then Terrell Lewis had his back was he had a little bit of a disc bulge, L5 S1. That kind of limited his, just ability to be able to move around and function and have that flexibility. And then I'll be limited for the rest of the week with my jaw.
With Aaron, how serious is that situation?
We're finding that out right now. He's still meeting with the doctors and kind of getting the necessary scans and things like that. And then on Wednesday, when we reconvene, I'll have a little bit more information for you.
What is the situation with Matthew Stafford go for this week and going forward?
Yeah, no updates. He's still in the protocol right now, and really, Artis, what will we have updates as the week progresses? Is that kind of how that?
Yep.
And okay, so I mean, if Aaron's situation is serious, have you given any consideration to just shutting down all these stars, Stafford, Kupp, Donald, and not having them play the rest, and now with Allen Robinson out, not having them play the rest of the season and just reboot for next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to. I think you got to take each individual case. I mean, I understand the question, but there's a lot of stuff that goes into these games, and I think as a competitor, for those players and really just for our guys, you want to be mindful of all the things that go into that. While I've also consistently said, being smart. And so those are all factors, but we are trying to compete to, get the results that we want. But man, it certainly has been something that I don't think anybody could have ever predicted. And when it rains, it pours.
Thanks very much.
You're welcome.
Gilbert?
Yeah, Sean, you mentioned the job, but I wanted to follow up on Roger Carter. Have you got a chance to talk to him about it?
Oh yeah, he's a great kid. He didn't mean to. He apologized to me, and honestly, when you slow mo it, it looks a lot worse than what it was. So there was a little soreness, but it was nothing but an innocent little accident that occurred, and totally we're all good. I love him. He's a great kid, and I know he felt bad about it. I'm sure he got a bunch of. He came up to me after the game because I don't even think he realized when he was sprinting out there that he had caught me like he did. But I love Roger, and no hard feelings, just a little bit of a sore jaw.
Gotcha, Sean. And just to follow up on Allen Robinson, how was that conversation when you talked to him with the devastating injury? It wasn't the season that he wanted with the Rams, but just talking to him, how was that for you guys?
Yeah, he's a pro's pro. I mean, he's been so impressive just the way that he's handled things on a day-to-day basis. And this is something that he's dealt with before in his other foot. And so he had a history, of understanding kind of the specifics of a navicular stress fracture and what that entails in terms of the surgery and the recovery. And, I think that it was more along the lines of, you find out, why am I having this soreness in my foot? We injected it with the hopeful optimism that it would make the pain subside. And when that didn't occur, we ended up getting the CT scan on Friday. And that's when we found out late Friday afternoon, after I had spoken with you guys, what was going on. And you want to get the surgery so that, he can get himself healthy and ready to go. And he's been through this before. So it's disappointing, but, I continue to remain impressed with whether it be Allen or a lot of our guys, just the way that they've handled so many of the different things that have gone, not according to plan and in the right way, and worrying about the things that they can control. And that's been inspiring to me.
Thank you, Sean.
You're welcome.
Jordan.
Hey, Sean, just to clarify, on Matthew, I know we asked about the concussion protocol, but, in terms of the neck specifically, how is his neck doing? What's the process like in terms of the further testing in that regard? And where's he at in terms of comfortability?
I think he's feeling good. I think, you're still going through the checks and balances in regards to some of the MRIs and the scans, where you're seeing stuff that might show up on there that, unless you're in football game-like type of settings, those types of things, just when you're going about your normal everyday approach, might not be something that he would feel symptomatic wise. And so that is something that you're continuing to check and make sure that everything is in alignment. But the protocol, the next stuff, all of that, all of those things, are continuing to be monitored for us. And the neck is certainly one of those things that's a separate entity from the protocol, as you're kind of asking.
Yeah. And then on the Aaron front, are you, because you're saying it's a sprain, obviously you guys would have seen that, negative x-rays in that regard. But are you able to say whether, or like the nature of is it one of those high sprains that we're looking at here, or?
I think so. Yeah, that's what Reggie had communicated. And so, even when you go, like, if you say it's an x-ray, so many times, even when I've had ankle injuries, you might have a clean x-ray, but sometimes the ligament damage is actually more significant than if you had actually broken your ankle. And so that's where you get those other scans. You consult with the doctors and make sure that, obviously we'll make the appropriate steps for Aaron in terms of how we move forward, and what that means as far as his availability for this week and the weeks to come.
This is going to be a very dramatic pivot. But with Bobby Wagner, why is he so timeless against defending the run?
Well, I think it's his preparation. I think it's his concept trigger, his ability to be able to recognize things and anticipate. He's obviously an incredibly gifted athlete, but he's so strong at the point of attack. He's a knockback tackler. It's all of those things combined into one. It's the preparation. It's the ability that he's been blessed with. It's just the strength, the athleticism, and then being able to understand within the framework of whatever that defensive call is, where he fits and how he can make sure that the front and the second and third levels are playing it as one. But those are a lot of the reasons why he's been a great player, but particularly against the run, as you're asking.
I had asked you earlier a couple weeks ago about sort of the spike in run production across the league. And also the spike, it seems, in maybe a little bit more of a throwback style of run production, counter to what you yourself and, Kyle and all those guys have enjoyed with the outside zone stuff. Bobby, it almost seems like none of that phases him. You could throw him something from 8 years ago and he'd trigger and recognize just as seamlessly as he would some of the more modernized stuff. Have you seen that, and kind of what is that about him that can do that?
I think a lot of instances the league is cyclical, and and when it's cyclical like it is, a lot of these concepts are things that he's seen over the course of his career. They might just be dressed up with jet motion, or instead of a guy coming from a near set in the backfield, he's jet motioning and kicking out the edge, so it's really understanding how, all right, this is the illusion of complexity. How do I make sure that these are still some of the same things in terms of how my fits and things are conflicted the way that they were early on in my career, but it might just happen to tick quicker because of the way that the offense is presenting it. But it's still 11 guys. You still have the same parameters in terms of eligibles on the line of scrimmage, not being able to go towards the line of scrimmage on these motions. And so I think it's because of his smarts, his ability to understand the nuances of what these concepts, the intent are. And then, what does it look like in terms of how they're dressed up a little bit differently with the presentation pre-snap prior to, what they might have been, 7-8 years ago, or, even 4 to 5 years ago.
So it kind of in a simpler way he can cut through the noise pretty good, is what you're saying.
Much easier way of saying it right there. No doubt.
Thanks, Sean.
You're welcome.
Sarah.
Sean, with losing Allen for the season, obviously this isn't the first time you've dealt with a big injury in the wide receiver room. Who this coaching staff or in this locker room, have you really leaned in as you guys have tried to work with maybe ways to get creative with this wide receiver group?
Yeah, I think it's also new, Sarah. So, that it's always a collaboration with the coaches, and then you always want to be as inclusive with your players as possible as well. And so, you talk about guys that, are, kind of end up being the longer tenured players in that room when you're looking at a Van Jefferson as he's getting himself kind of comfortable. But it's definitely a problem solved that you work with the coaching staff, and then, continuing to learn about the players that, are going to be asked to play more significant roles that maybe you're not as familiar with, other than just some opportunities they've had in training camp or even in preseason action. So it's kind of an ongoing everyday thing. And these are, very new things that have occurred within the last, couple days as it relates to Allen, but it's been a couple weeks as it relates to Cooper.
When yesterday you were telling us how it's just very different skill sets, the guys who are replacing Cooper and Allen. Is there anything in your coaching career that has kind of prepared you for, okay, we need to look at a new way to utilize, because they're different players. You can't just plug one guy in.
Yeah, I mean, I think every year, experience is one of the best ways that you learn. And certainly I'm not going to pretend to have, a bunch of experience relative to a lot of these other coaches that have been doing it for a long time, but, you lean on those guys that have had those experiences. You look at, the history around the league and the different ways to utilize those things. And I think you got to be able to understand, all right, learn about your players, and then how can you best utilize it? In a lot of instances, sometimes you're, just based on the parameters around your roster and things like that, you don't really even have an option of using anybody other than, hey, these are the options at your disposal, and let's figure out a way to maximize those guys. But to say that this has been something that, I've ever been through before, there's a lot of coaches with a lot more experience that, I've kind of shared the same sentiment as far as you talk to Joe DeCamillis, who has a bunch of experience and he's never seen anything quite like it. But the season goes on, and these will be things that we learn from and hopefully, benefit from in some form or fashion. It sure as hell better be something like that we take out of this.
Thanks, Sean.
You're welcome.
Stu?
Sean, I know you guys are obviously still working through what Aaron, Lance, and Terrell's availability looks like for this week, but do you at least have a preliminary idea of what that would potentially mean for younger players and opportunities if for some reason they can't go?
I really don't yet, Stu, only because it was literally just a few minutes before I jumped on here with you guys that I was able to connect with Artis and Reggie on some of those things. And so what I'll do as soon as, I get off with you guys and finish up with the media stuff today is start putting our heads together with the coaches and with Les's group and figuring out, what that looks like as it relates to possible projected actives for this coming week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Greg, and then we'll wrap up with Gary again.
Hey, Sean, we talked about all the guys who are out. Is there anybody who's close to coming back this week that might be back in the lineup?
You might have a chance for Brian Allen, but other than that, there's not anybody that particularly comes to mind for me.
Jordan Fuller's still a long way off.
That to my knowledge, he's not a candidate for this coming week.
Okay, and if John and Bryce are both healthy, ideally, who's your quarterback going forward?
I think we're going to work through that. It might be a combination of both. I think a lot of it entails, all right, let's look at, their body of work, and then let's take a look at Seattle and how we best feel is going to be the things that we want to try to be able to activate. So, I wouldn't say either or right now. I think both of those guys are potential candidates to play, if not use both.
And we'll wrap up with you, Gary.
Hey, Sean, Greg kind of touched on what I was going to ask you regarding Bryce and John Wolford, but since I got the last question, I was just curious, with what happened with that collision that you suffered on the sideline, is that something that you address in a comical or humorous way with your team the day after in terms of cut-ups or anything like that? Or is it just people just move on?
Yeah, I think, in a lot of it, yeah, that could be something that would be a good comic relief. It didn't occur today, but I'm sure the guys got a good laugh at that shit. I'm sorry for cursing. I'm sure they got a good laugh about that, on my behalf. I got a lot of texts asking about that one, that's for sure.